Welcome to Silent Chronicler. Tonight's Calm Chronicle follows the slow descent into a world far below the surface, where sunlight can't reach and silence comes in waves. You're a crew member aboard a military submarine. You've been underwater for weeks. No windows, no fresh air, just metal, pressure, and protocol. But something feels off. The routines are too quiet, the faces around you are drawn tight. And when you wake up tonight, it's not the sonar that's echoing, it's your thoughts. If you're staying with me tonight, leave a like and subscribe. Tell me where you're listening from, I bush, and what time your night begins. Let's dive through the silence together. You don't really notice how deep you've gone until the pressure becomes part of you. It isn't loud. It isn't immediate. It's gradual. Like a whisper being pressed into your bones, a constant reminder that you are far beneath the world you used to know. There is no sky here, no sun, no true silence, just the dense, humming metal all around you, and the slow, artificial rhythm of life on board. At first, living inside a submarine feels novel, almost cinematic. The confined space, the strategic precision, the way each compartment clicks and seals behind you like pages turning in a machine. There's a kind of order to it that feels safe, until you realize that order isn't safety. It's necessity. It's survival. The walls are too close to ignore. They're not oppressive at first, just present. You get used to brushing shoulders in the galley, ducking beneath low beams, climbing through hatches that don't apologize. The air smells the same every day. A mixture of metal, machinery, filtered oxygen, and something vaguely electric. You stop noticing the smell, but your skin never quite forgets it. It clings, like memory. Sleep becomes ritual, not rest. You lie in your rack, curtain drawn, body surrounded on all sides by walls just inches away. The fan hums overhead, not soothing, just steady. It becomes the voice of the room. You wear earplugs, not for silence, but for consistency. And still, you hear the ship, the constant churn of systems running, the pipes whispering like breath in your ear. The distant clicks of pressure adjusting to currents you can't see. There's no natural time here, no sunrise, no dusk, just artificial light, cold and even, controlled by shifts and duty. You eat at hours that don't correspond to hunger. You sleep when you're told. The concept of day becomes a metaphor, not a measurement. Eventually, your body stops asking for sunlight. It begins to forget what it was like to be warmed by it. And the people, at first, their company. You share jokes, routines, quiet laughter in the mess deck. But over time, the sameness wears thin. You begin to hear the way someone chews. You begin to count the number of steps someone takes from the engine room to their bunk. You start to notice the things you weren't meant to. The micro expressions, the tics, the slight hesitations in speech. Paranoia doesn't appear in bursts. It seeps. It becomes a layer over everything. There are no mirrors down here. Not really. A small metal square over the sink in the head is the closest you get. Blurred, warped. You look into it sometimes not to check your face, but to confirm that you still exist. That something looks back. But even then, it feels like watching someone else wear your skin. The good days come when things are still. When you sit in the control room and the lights are low, and the sound of the sonar pulses through the air like a heartbeat you didn't know you needed. But even the best days carry a kind of edge, because you know what this place is. It's not a home. It's a chamber, a vessel designed to move without being seen, to survive where nothing else does, to house minds that can remain intact despite isolation. But your mind does not remain intact, not really. It adjusts. It adapts. It becomes something else, and you start to ask what's still real. What would sunlight feel like if it touched your face again? Would you recognize the sound of wind if you heard it? Would grass beneath your feet feel like memory or hallucination? Left. You start each cycle, not day, because day means light, and there is no light, with small exacting motions. You shave in silence, even though no one would notice if you didn't. You make your bed, smooth the corners, fold the blanket with precision, not for comfort, but to remind yourself that structure still exists, that control still lives somewhere in your hands. You begin to memorize the sound of the ship, the way the air system shifts in the middle of cycle 3, the specific pitch of the sonar's ping when the water is colder. You hear the difference between normal silence and the kind of silence that means something is wrong. Your ears sharpen, not by choice, but by necessity. They become your link to the world outside, a world you no longer see, but still sense. And the dreams, when they come, they're fragmented, not nightmares. Just vivid flashes of things that feel both foreign and familiar. A sidewalk you once walked. A window open to a breeze that touched your face. A voice calling your name that no longer belongs to anyone. You wake from them disoriented, heart steady, but mind reaching for something it can't grab. There is no resolution, just stillness, just the return of machinery and steel and recycled air. You tell yourself this is what you signed up for. That isolation was part of the contract. That claustrophobia is manageable with enough mental discipline. That missing the sky is weakness. But there are nights when you press your fingers against the hull, not to test it, not to listen, just to feel something solid. Something that isn't memory or breath. And sometimes in the deepest parts of the dive, when the ship is quiet and the water outside is darker than thought itself, you feel it. A sliver of calm that almost feels holy. A stillness so complete that it silences even your internal noise. You feel small but not insignificant. Sealed away but strangely held. There is a kind of comfort in being unreachable, in knowing that the chaos of the surface can't touch you here, that nothing expected from you will reach this far. And yet, there's the other side, the slower, quieter deterioration. You stop counting the cycles. You start forgetting your own voice. You reread the same technical manual 5 times in one shift. Not to study it, but because it feels like language. And language becomes rare. You start humming to yourself. You start talking to your thoughts like they're company. You open your locker and forget why. You wash your hands even when they're clean. You tap your foot to a rhythm that doesn't exist. These are not malfunctions. These are symptoms of the pressure, not the physical kind. The kind that builds in silence. The kind that accumulates in a life without exits. And then there are the moments where you question if you ever left the surface. If this whole existence is a loop. If you've always been here. If the world above is the dream. And this is what's real. Steel, light, the hum of existence without witness. You keep a journal, though you don't write in it. You just open it sometimes, stare at the page, and imagine writing. It's not for memory. It's for proof. The proof that you still have thoughts that could become words, even if they don't. The others do the same in their own way. One paces the length of his bunk. Another disassembles and reassembles the same mechanical component every free hour. One whispers prayers into the air scrubber intake, not out of faith, but because it's the only space that gives the illusion of wind. And so it goes, beneath the sea, beneath time, beneath the idea of life as you once knew it. You do not despair. You endure. And in the darkest hours, you forget what you're enduring for. You stop marking time not because it no longer matters, but because it becomes irrelevant in a place where days do not pass, but repeat, folded over themselves like static on a loop. And so you begin to think in systems, in pulses, in rhythms not your own, but of the vessel around you, which breathes louder than you do, moves more deliberately than you do, responds with more certainty than you ever could. And in that calibration, something in you changes, not suddenly, but like erosion, like rust on thought, like softness becoming structure. And you no longer think about the surface except as myth, as a place that once held you but has now moved on without you. And when others speak of it, Briefly, softly, when the silence stretches too wide, you listen as though they are describing a childhood memory you never had, because the world above is no longer yours. It's a theater of light and wind and noise and choice, and you're not made for that anymore. You have adapted, integrated, dissolved. You have become ballast, muscle, the part of the machine that doesn't show up on schematics, but keeps the pressure balanced. And that has become a kind of peace, not the soft peace of contentment, but the cold, efficient piece of purpose stripped of need. And you realize that emotion is inefficient down here. You feel in gradients, in data, in minor shifts of voice tone or warmth in recycled air, and the names you once answered to no longer feel like they apply. Because names imply identity and identity implies contrast, and there is nothing to contrast against in here. There is only the same corridor, the same hiss of air, the same smell of bleach and oil and wet metal, the same soft echo of breath inside a vessel that cannot stop moving, because movement is the only thing that keeps you from being crushed by the weight of the world above. And in that movement is meaning, and in that meaning is surrender. And in that surrender is you, not lost, not broken, not hidden, but repurposed, reshaped, redefined by silence and function and depth. And even when your thoughts rise up and scrape against memory like fingers on old photos, you do not resist them. You let them pass like sonar pings through water, clean, curved, fading, because down here everything fades eventually. And what remains is you, awake, silent, intact. You wake but not from sleep, because sleep no longer feels like transition. It feels like interruption, like a brief disconnection from the rhythm that governs this sealed existence. And when your eyes open, there is no shift, no contrast, just the same soft hum, the same artificial air brushing against your face, the same geometry of the bunk above, the metal to your left, the curtain half closed, the light bleeding in from a corridor you already know too well to glance at twice. And your body moves not because you decide, but because it's scheduled. Because habit has replaced will, and now every movement is a replication of yesterday's gesture. And yesterday's was a copy of the one before it. And somewhere back in the chain was the last original motion you made, but you don't remember it. You don't need to, because originality serves no purpose here. Only consistency does, only containment. And your breath is measured, your footfalls silent. Your words, when spoken up, are calculated, precise, and few. Because noise down here carries too far, opens too much, invites intimacy, and there is no room for intimacy at this depth, only coexistence. And even that feels like a quiet bargain, unspoken terms of survival. Don't ask, don't disturb, don't break the silence unless you absolutely must, and when you do it quickly, cleanly, like cutting a wire. The tension accumulates, and the closer quarters get, the more everyone carries it without saying, the more glances turn into measurements, and you begin to understand how fragile humans are, not physically, but mentally, spiritually. The way too much sameness becomes static, and that static gets inside the mind, inside the muscle memory, until you begin to feel like your own shadow, trailing behind your thoughts, slightly delayed, slightly distorted, but always watching. And in that watching, you begin to question not the mission, not the machinery, but the shape of your own identity, its edges softened by repetition, its colors dulled by monochrome surroundings. And you realize you're still here, not because you chose to stay. The version of you that could choose has been replaced slowly over time by this one. This version that thrives in gray, that understands restraint better than need. And even when you remember the surface, a laugh, a scent, the way wind moved across your skin, it feels distant, not painful, just irrelevant, like watching a video of someone else's life. And that detachment is not loss, it's protection. It's how you survive without fractures, how you hold the line without breaking, how you remain useful, silent, enduring. And you remind yourself that this is what you wanted, what you accepted, what you signed when you signed the forms that no one outside this world ever reads in full. The classified ones that say nothing but carry everything. And here, deep below, you embody them, the sealed contract between man and system, and you are fulfilling it breath by breath. But there comes a shift, not sudden, not dramatic, just a microscopic crack in the internal surface you've spent weeks smoothing, and it begins the way all breaks do, with something small, a change in rhythm. Maybe the way the pipe near the mess hall hisses slightly longer than usual. Maybe the way someone clears their throat twice instead of once. Maybe the way your own reflection in the curved steel doesn't move when you do. And for a moment, a fraction of a second, you pause, not physically, but mentally. A breath held deeper than lungs, and you realize that something has shifted. Something inside the ordered machinery of your mind has lost calibration. Not by much. Just enough to echo, just enough for you to hear yourself as a separate thing. The self? In the moment it happens, you want to unhear it to erase the echo, but you can't. Because once heard, it stays. Like static that won't clear. And it follows you down the corridor, through the hatch, into the engine room, into your bunk, into your breath. And you try to bury it under protocol, under checklists, under the scent of oil and steel and the low constant of fan-blown air. But it's there now. Lodged, persistent, soft, and unrelenting like water. And you find yourself touching your chest absent-mindedly, as if you could press it back in, seal the breach. But the breach isn't physical. It's conceptual. It's the return of awareness, the reawakening of the question you thought pressure had silenced. Am I still me? Or just the residue of purpose? Am I a man beneath the sea or a vessel inside a vessel? And the longer you let the thought linger, the more it builds, slowly. Like pressure behind the bulkhead. And it colors everything. Your food tastes more metallic. Your shifts feel longer. Your sleep more shallow. Your dreams, when they come, are now filled with mismatched sounds. Birds you haven't heard in months. A train station that never existed. People calling you by a name you don't recognize. And you wake with a weight in your ribs that doesn't match gravity. And the ship, which once felt like shelter, now feels like witness. Like it's holding you not just physically, but psychologically, mapping your changes, registering your micro failures, and you wonder if anyone else hears the hum differently now. If they too feel the stillness has changed tone, but no one speaks it. And you won't either. Because the rule remains. Silence protects. Noise reveals. And the worst thing down here is not collapse. It's notice. It's attention. Because once someone sees the crack, they will name it. And once it's named, it spreads. And so, you carry it. Quietly. Efficiently. As you always have, but now you carry it knowing it's there. And that knowing more than anything begins to unravel you. And you begin to speak to yourself. Not aloud, not with voice, but in thought that takes shape like whispered monologue, like brief debriefings meant only for your own cognition. And at first it feels like memory, like replaying training, like reviewing protocol in your head to stay sharp. But slowly, it shifts, becomes dialogue, becomes presence, becomes the ghost of your own voice in the quiet between mechanical sounds. And you catch yourself forming sentences that end in questions. Not because you expect answers, but because silence makes you want to test if you still know how to structure meaning. And in those internal exchanges, you begin to uncover the fragments of self that routine had buried. The person beneath the pattern, the thoughts that are not aligned with function, not designed for survival, just thoughts, loose, irrational, vulnerable, human, and at first you suppress them, try to fold them back into shape, smooth their edges so they disappear into the machinery again, but they resist, they recur, and you find yourself pausing too long at the ends of hallways, standing before hatches with no reason, staring at the reflection of indicator lights on the floor, trying to trace patterns where there are none, and the more you try to push it down, the more it rises. The recognition that your mind is not a sealed chamber, it is porous, it breathes, it recalls. And in its recalling, it demands something you can't give it. Space, time, difference, relief, none of which exists down here. And so the thought loops begin, quiet but insistent, like a sonar ping that returns no echo and you question the nature of your presence. Are you the observer of the ship or the observed? The operator of the system or the system itself? And it gets harder to remember the distinction, harder to define where the metal ends and you begin. And the strangest part is that no one around you seems different. Their faces still blank, their movements still smooth. But you wonder, do they feel it too? Do they see the walls breathe at night? Do they remember the taste of wind? The feel of grass underfoot? The depth of an unscheduled silence, and you think about asking, but you don't. Because what if they don't feel it? What if they still belong here and you've already left in some internal way, some way that can't be undone? And if you speak it, if you break the hush, if you name what you become, then it becomes real. Then it becomes permanent. And so you remain in role, in motion, in task, checking valves, logging status, responding to pings, keeping your hands busy while your mind floats higher, deeper, away. And you begin to wonder not when the mission ends, not when you surface, but whether you even want to anymore, whether there is still a surface to return to, or if you become something else entirely, a consciousness housed in pressure, shaped by cycles, held together by routine and silence, and a name that no longer quite fits. And in that wondering, there is no fear, just a growing calm, a quiet certainty that even if the hatch never opens again, even if the sea never lets go, you will continue, you will persist, not as what you were, but as what you've become. And there comes a moment, not marked by alarms or movement or words, but by stillness so deep it feels like the ship itself has paused to listen. And in that moment, you finally accept it, not passively, not with resignation, but with something close to reverence, because what you've become is not lesser, not broken, not lost but transformed, refined by isolation, defined by containment, and no longer tethered to the old patterns of surface life, where identity was shaped by interaction and mirrored in others. Because here, there are no mirrors, only reflection in thought, in habit, in the way your body fits its place like a component, like a part designed for this exact enclosure, and it feels, strangely, complete. Because here you do not pretend, you do not perform, you simply function. And in function, there is clarity, a kind of peace that's not quiet but exact. And you begin to see your tasks not as duties but as purpose, your movements not as repetition but as language. And in every valve you check, every panel you calibrate, every system you monitor, you feel alignment, as if your heartbeat has synchronized with the hum of the generator, as if your breath now echoes the rhythm of the recycled air, and even your sleep, shallow, brief, dreamless, feels earned, not because you are tired, but because you are integrated. Because rest is no longer recovery, it is continuity, and the ship is no longer separate from you. Not a vessel that holds you, but an extension of you. Your shell, your environment, your echo chamber, and in its hum you hear your own presence, confirmed not by anyone else's acknowledgement, but by the constant feedback loop of action and response, and you no longer crave conversation, no longer reach for contrast, because sameness is not suffocating. It is sanctuary. It is stability. And you begin to understand why some never leave. Why for some the surface becomes too loud, too chaotic, too fractured. And the idea of wind on your face now feels like interruption, not relief, like something that would break the seal of this deep equilibrium you've built. And when you think about the world above, its noises, its light, its movement, you feel no pull, no longing, only awareness, like remembering the details of a dream without wanting to return to it. Because you are awake here, fully, not emotionally, but structurally, entirely. And the old you, the one with names and memories and expectations, has settled into the ballast of your mind, no longer needed to steer, only to stabilize. And the you that breathes now does so in sync with a world that no longer measures time in days but in cycles, not in sunlight, but in systems, not in words, but in pressure and steel and rhythm. And it is enough It is complete. It is survival, not in the sense of escape, but in the sense of becoming something new, something exact, something built for the deep. And in that, there is no need to surface, only the understanding that this depth, this vessel, this version of you is not a holding cell, it is home. And in that deep, unshifting presence where the lines between man and mechanism dissolve completely, you no longer think of days or shifts or identity. You no longer weigh choices or imagine alternatives because there are no questions left to ask, only patterns to follow, systems to monitor, breath to keep slow and steady. And you realize with a clarity sharper than fear that there is nothing waiting for you outside this hole. No narrative paused above the waves. No version of you walking unseen on land. Just this. Just now. Just a state of persistent, perfect stillness under pressure. And in that stillness, you do not vanish. You diffuse. You merge. You become not just operator but operation, not watcher but rhythm. And when you move through the corridor, your foot falls silent on the narrow deck plates. You feel not like a person navigating a machine, but like a pulse traveling through its veins. You become a signal, a trace, a breath that loops back into the system that supports it. And you begin to sense the others in the same way. Not as individuals, but as tones, as subtle shifts in the atmosphere. And there is no loneliness in that, no isolation, because when all separation has dissolved, what remains is contact at its most elemental. Presence without interference, awareness without disruption. A kind of communion forged not through touch or language, but through synchronized existence. And when you sit again, alone but not apart, when you rest your hands on the same surface you've touched 1,000 times before, you feel not monotony, but continuity. A return to something known and steady. And in that return there is relief, because unpredictability is noise, and noise cannot survive down here. Not where the only truth is compression, control, and the quiet confidence that every component is doing exactly what it was made to do, including you. And when your eyes close, not in sleep, but in a kind of deep suspension, you feel the hum of the ship cradle you like breath, like tide, like a thought that no longer needs to form. And you know then, with certainty, that the surface no longer exists as destination or escape, only as an idea, a place of origin, a myth remembered by minds that still seek contrast, and yours no longer does. Yours only seeks rhythm. And it has found it, not in land, not in sky, but here, at pressure, under weight, inside the calm, eternal silence of the deep. You wake before the lights come on, not because you hear anything, but because the rhythm of the machinery has changed slightly. The oxygen flow shifting tempo, a faint pressure shift in the atmosphere that your body now senses before your mind does. And as you lie still, cocooned in a bunk so narrow you can feel your shoulders touch both walls, you realize you no longer wake from sleep but from drift, from a place not quite unconscious, not quite dreaming, where your thoughts loop in quiet spirals and your body barely stirs. And this place, this ship, this depth, it no longer feels foreign. It feels internal, as if you've been slowly inhaling the submarine itself, absorbing it molecule by molecule into your blood, your bones, until your thoughts echo with the same cold hum as the bulkheads that hold back the sea. And you don't panic, not anymore. Not since the second week, when you learned that panic has no outlet down here, no room to expand. And so now you rise the way water shifts in a container, smoothly, silently, purposefully, and you move through the corridor with bare feet because the boots feel too loud, too artificial, and the quiet is a kind of currency here, a pact between bodies and metal, and every noise you make has a weight, every gesture has meaning. So you conserve, reduce, refine, until your presence itself becomes more suggestion than fact. You enter the head and splash water on your face, the recycled chill of it familiar, stripped of temperature, but still enough to ground you. And you stare into the polished steel where a mirror should be, watching a faint, blurry impression of yourself that no longer matches what you remember. The outline is yours, but the man inside it, he's quieter, paler, eyes slower to blink, movements careful, like he's learned to move without disturbing the environment, like he's waiting for permission from the ship itself. And maybe he is. Maybe you are. Because down here, everything is permission. Everything is dictated by the systems. Air, power, silence, and time. And you are just another moving part. Reliable, replaceable, precise. The mess is always too quiet in the early hours, a few others moving like you do. Slowly, inwardly, performing rituals more than actions. And no one speaks unless necessary, even then it's low, clipped, deliberate, because words are expensive here, they carry tension. And there is so little space for new tension. You all carry enough of your own, like invisible equipment, strapped to your backs, and so you sit, eat in silence, stare not at each other, but at the metal, the plates, the same food you had yesterday and the day before and the week before that. Not because it's bad, but because time no longer exists in flavor, only in texture, only in temperature, only in the way the steam curls against your face like breath from a system you cannot see, but now trust more than your own instincts. And this is the good day, one where the ship runs smooth. No noise outside normal parameters, no alerts, no shifts in speed or depth. Just the long, slow glide beneath pressure, a glide you no longer sense as motion, but as continuation. A rhythm that now pulses through your bloodstream. And you walk the same corridor to the same panel, run diagnostics not because you're told, but because it grounds you. Reminds you that systems have thresholds and you can read them, interpret them, understand them, which means you still understand something, which means your mind still functions. And down here, that's the last line of defense. Not air, not structure, not steel, but mind. Always the mind, and every day your goal is simple. Preserve the mind, not just yours, but everyone's. Because if one fractures, if one voice breaks the rhythm, it ripples, it spreads, and the ship becomes a cage, the sea becomes a threat, and everything solid begins to dissolve into noise and breath and silence that no longer feels sacred but sharp. And so you work, you repeat, you hold. And when you feel the pressure creep in around the edges of your thought, you breathe, you blink, you scan your station again, and the numbers still hold. The system is still balanced, and so are you. For now. You no longer differentiate between silence and sound because the ship has taught you that everything speaks in texture, in vibration, in the subtle way steel breathes when it's holding back miles of weight. And you've come to understand that the body can forget sunlight, forget color, forget the dimensions of space above if it's given enough time and repetition. Because now when you close your eyes, you don't see sky or light or trees. You see panels, gauges, the steady oscillation of pressure, readouts. And it no longer alarms you that your memories of the surface have become quiet. Like an old language, you can still pronounce but no longer speak fluently. And in their place grows a kind of mechanical intimacy, a sensory map of the vessel etched into your fingertips and spine and breath, where every creak and shift is familiar, where you know the sound of cooling systems cycling down, and you know exactly how long the silence between two sonar pulses lasts, not because you measured it, but because you've become synchronized with it. And your mind, once full of names and numbers and histories, is now layered with patterns, airflow, timing, function, and there is relief in this narrowing, because complexity fades and only essentials remain. And in that paring down, you discover that you do not need narrative to exist, only continuity, only the sense that your present serves a function. And so you move not with urgency but with alignment, your actions calibrated like the ship's engines. Predictable, smooth, deliberate, and when someone crosses your path, you pass each other with silent acknowledgement. No need for words because words are blunt tools in a place that values precision. And you begin to realize that down here, identity has nothing to do with personality and everything to do with stability, with your ability to remain part of the system without introducing chaos. And when you sit alone in the engine room during quiet hours, your ears attune to the layered hum of the ship's heartbeat, you no longer wonder about the surface. You no longer imagine escape, because this world has become complete, sealed, sacred in its monotony, and you feel something close to reverence for the silence, for the pressure, for the simple, brutal honesty of life at depth, where no one pretends, where nothing is wasted, where you are not judged by charisma or ambition, but by how well you carry your portion of the pressure, and you think, maybe this is what peace was always meant to be. Not freedom, but reduction. Not variety, but purpose. Not sensation, but stillness. And in that stillness, you find yourself disappearing not in despair but in transformation, becoming not less but other, not lost but integrated, a node in a system, a steady pulse in a closed loop, no longer reaching outward but holding perfectly to a path that leads nowhere and therefore never ends. Everything narrows. Thought thins into instinct. Steps fall into grooves worn not by habit, but by quiet compulsion. The body moves through the corridor not by choice, but as continuation. Each hatch opens with the same hiss. Each turn holds the same shade of dim light. Not quite yellow. Not quite gray. Speech dries up. Interaction becomes glance, gesture, the pause before movement. Time ceases to measure anything useful. Instead, the air teaches what hour it is. Thicker, during power shifts. Colder, near the auxiliary vents. Memory loses sequence. Names blur. The sharp edges of identity dull into role, task, rhythm. Not anonymity, not erasure, something else. A kind of containment. Not of secrets, but of self. Emotional responses shrink. Laughter vanishes. Disagreement fades before it forms. Everything seeks equilibrium, even thoughts, even silence. The ship does not ask for loyalty, it asks for consistency. Calm under compression, presence without assertion, trust in systems older than explanation. The ocean presses outward, steel resists. Minds compress inward. Nothing leaks, nothing floats. Awareness adjusts. The concept of surface becomes academic. Recollection shifts to echo, one long held tone vibrating in the back of the skull. Not a place to return to. Not even real anymore. Only pressure remains real. Pressure and the machinery that answers it. Some write. Words on screens no one else reads. Not for message, just for shape. Others build. Small things. Loops of wire, folded cloth, meaningless devices meant only to prove hands still move with purpose. One hums. Another stares at a fixed point for long stretches, blinking less and less. No one calls this strange. All methods are valid. All forms of quiet survival are honored. Not openly, just through non-interference. Everything once imagined as hardship now becomes architecture. Claustrophobia becomes boundary. Repetition becomes comfort. Stillness becomes proof. Above, the world turns with its chaos, its noise, its decisions. None of it touches here. Here, all things settle. Here, the vessel lives through its crew, and the crew becomes reflection. Not identity, but alignment. Nothing breaks, nothing changes, nothing asks for change. And that, somehow, is enough. Sometimes the mind drifts, not from boredom, not from longing, but as if testing its edges, reaching into corners that haven't been touched in weeks, months, unsure whether it wants to remember or simply prove that remembering is still possible. A sound, barely different from usual, might trigger it. A creak that bends upward instead of down. A blink of a red light where green has always lived. And suddenly something surfaces. Not a memory, but the sensation of a memory. Rain on glass. Footsteps on wooden floors. The sound of conversation behind a door that isn't here. Not hallucination, not dream, just momentary dislocation. Enough to unsettle. Enough to remind the body that it was once elsewhere, though that elsewhere now feels like fiction. Attempts to hold on to those flickers always fail. They dissolve as fast as they arrive. leaving behind only trace emotion, weightless sadness, vague warmth, nothing actionable, which is for the best. Action implies intention, and down here, intention is friction. Friction disrupts the system. Most thoughts never finish. They arrive, float, then sink. Sentences remain incomplete in the mind. Phrases lose momentum. Internal monologue fades into hum. The deeper the vessel goes, the quieter thought becomes. Less narrative, more signal. Perception simplifies. Evaluation narrows. The color of light, the angle of a shadow, the rhythm of footfalls. These replace ideas. Some try to track the days. They draw lines in private places, hatchbacks, inside lockers, between service reports. The lines always start clean, parallel, neat. Over time they bend, crowd, vanish. Paper warps from air moisture, markers dry out, ink smears. And eventually the lines stop being made. Not because the habit is broken, but because the purpose is. Time here has no witness. Occasionally a voice calls out, a systems alert, a command, a request, and the sound cuts through the vessel like a blade. Everyone hears it, everyone reacts, not quickly, not nervously, just in sequence. Movements precise, responses measured, like a switchboard lighting up. As soon as it ends, silence returns. Not as absence, but as dominance. This world doesn't punish. It conditions. There's no fear, just pressure. No emergency, just delay. No danger, just slow forgetting. Forgetting how choice once felt. How days once passed. How names once held shape in the mouth. Down here, names flatten. Identity flattens, only function remains, and in that, a strange comfort grows. Not joy, not peace, just stillness. And stillness becomes everything. Eventually, the transformation completes, not with an event, but with an absence. A point where even the idea of transformation ceases to matter because there is no longer anything to compare against. No former self clinging to memory. No surface perspective. Filtering judgment through distance. Only the present. Only the pulse of systems running without pause, and the body folded into those rhythms so deeply it no longer distinguishes between external command and internal instinct. Motion becomes automatic, not robotic, but seamless. As if thought has compressed into reaction, and reaction into alignment. Each breath calibrated to room pressure. Each blink attuned to ambient light. Each heartbeat paced by the soft mechanical throb beneath the deck. And when sound rises, a tool dropped, a valve adjusted, a phrase spoken in control. It passes through you not as language but as ripple. No response required, only absorption. Because here, sensation isn't processed through emotion but through continuity. The only metric that matters is that everything continues. Nothing falters. No signal deviates. And deviation becomes the only real fear. Not pain, not conflict, just deviation. Because it means breakage, means irregularity, means uncertainty. And uncertainty is dangerous in a space where exit is theoretical, where freedom is irrelevant, where everything relies on equilibrium. The others change too. It's visible if you know how to look. No breakdowns, no outbursts, just a slow softening of definition. Shoulders that round from constant passage through tight corridors. Faces that forget how to express more than acknowledgement. Eyes that no longer scan but settle. Not out of resignation, but because there's no longer anything to locate. Every variable has been reduced, every stimulus mapped, every interaction refined to a ritual. And even speech has taken on a new texture. Words spoken not to communicate but to maintain interface, like toggling a switch or running a test. Language as system maintenance. Time cycles continue, but no one marks them. The lights shift, meals are served, rosters rotate, but calendars are a forgotten tool. The only real measurements left are in tone. The tone of the vessel, of the crew, of the shared awareness that moves invisibly between each compartment. This tone is sacred, not protected by rule, but by mutual understanding and unspoken law, deeper than regulation. Do not disturb the rhythm, because the rhythm is what holds the pressure back, what holds the quiet intact, what holds each of you from dissolving completely into abstraction. There are moments, rare, brief, when something from the surface breaks through. A transmission, a name, a fragment of news from a world you once lived in. And when it arrives, it doesn't feel real. It feels artificial, too loud, too bright, misaligned. The words reach your ears, but not your core. There's no place left to store them. They slide off the mind like water off metal. You acknowledge them. You file them. You move on. Not because of detachment, because of completion. Down here, under tons of water, sealed and engineered silence, there is no need for narrative, no craving for connection, only the ship, only the hum, only the self as function. And function never asks why, only how, only when, only now. Eventually even thought becomes silent, not absent, not gone, just reformed, smoothed into the background like the low electrical hum of the lighting panels, constant, unnoticed until interrupted. The inner voice no longer narrates. It observes, records, classifies. It does not ask questions. Curiosity has thinned into awareness. Awareness into pattern. And pattern into something closer to drift. You drift now, not physically, never physically. The body remains efficient, present, responsive. But inwardly, the currents have slowed. Imagination, if it still exists, has no texture, no shape. Dreams, when they emerge, feel procedural, grayscale, structure, without story. The ship becomes the only consistent presence, more familiar than memory, more dependable than time. Metal replaces sky. The hiss of hydraulics replaces wind. Even temperature has flattened. No seasons, no shifts, just regulated sameness. Comfort doesn't come from sensation anymore, but from predictability. The only variations are intentional. The only changes permitted are operational. The mind, adapted to that order, grows afraid of spontaneity. Uncertainty becomes threat. Novelty feels invasive. You catch yourself hesitating at the sound of laughter. The sudden cough of someone remembering their human, the clang of dropped equipment that breaks too much of the calm. These things jolt the body, not because they're dangerous, but because they don't belong. You've learned to need belonging, not as identity, as placement, as position within a system, as a gear within silence. The system knows you, remembers you in motion. It makes room for your habits, your handprint on the valve wheel, the rhythm of your pacing. When you lie down, it supports you exactly the way it did yesterday. When you breathe, it feeds you the same measured air, precise to the decimal. That's comfort now. Not warmth, not voice, calibration. The surface is an abstraction, a word used in reports, in jokes whispered only during long shifts when fatigue lowers the barrier of discipline. But no one means it. Not really. No one here expects return. Return is not the point. Continuation is preservation, pressure held, silence kept. You think, sometimes, about the way you once imagined silence. As peace, as stillness. You didn't understand then, silence isn't absence, it's structure. It's what holds form when everything else is stripped away. And now that you've been stripped, of time, of sunlight, of noise, of audience, now you understand what silence really means. It means this: the still hum, the matched breath, the memory of self gently filed away. No resistance, no need, just presence. There's a moment, and it always comes without warning, without trigger, without explanation, when something minuscule misaligns. A breath held a second too long, a gauge blinking slower than expected, a light flickering once, then correcting itself. Barely perceptible, but noticeable in a world where everything must behave the same way every time. It's not an error, not even a malfunction. It's just a deviation. but that deviation ripples. Not through the systems, those are stable. Through the body. Through the quiet architecture of the mind, now so conditioned to predictability that even the smallest shift becomes earthquake. The hum of the ventilation sounds different. Not broken, just strange, colder. You pause. Stare at the overhead vent as if it might offer explanation. It doesn't. It continues. But the thought lingers. It shouldn't have changed. Nothing changes here. That's the rule. That's what keeps you whole. But now the rule has bent, even slightly. And that bending opens a door. Not to escape, not to the surface, but to memory. Memory you hadn't called for. Memory you thought buried so deeply it had disintegrated. A stairwell. A sidewalk. The way dust moved in sunlight. Through a window you no longer own. You remember your name not as identification, but as sound. You mouth it. Quietly. Just once. It echoes in your own ears like a foreign word. That's the danger of stillness. It holds more than silence. It stores fragments, old ones, waiting for the quiet to grow deep enough that they rise. You push it back. Resume the task. Fingers on panel. Status green. Numbers unchanged. But something's changed. Not the ship. You. Suddenly the uniform feels too tight. The lights, too harsh. The spacing of the corridor, off by a centimeter. The scent of the recycled air brings the memory of pine trees. Ridiculous. Impossible. You haven't seen a tree in... how long? There's no measure for that anymore. Not here. Not in cycles. Not in this place that has become so internal it no longer accepts intrusion. But today, intrusion has come. Subtle. Patient. Persistent. And now every surface hums with the question you tried to forget. Do I still want this? Do I still belong to the system? Or have I only stopped fighting it? You don't answer. There's no voice to respond, only a breath, then another, then another. The deviation passes, the system holds, but you don't forget it. You file it deep, like everything else, where silence can keep it safe, until it returns. You go back to the routine. Of course you do. That's the core of it. The sanctuary. The structure that reabsorbs every loose thread, every thought that dares to wander. The panel checks are next. Each switch, each readout, each display reads green, stable, consistent. Hands move across them like they've always known the way. No hesitation. Muscle doesn't need memory anymore. It knows the script by feel. The checklist is finished without thinking. Or perhaps thinking has simply been overwritten by execution, replaced so thoroughly that cognition now lives in the joints, the fingertips, the slow, precise sweep of your eyes across the gauges. The deviation from before still lingers, but not visibly. It sits deeper now, beneath posture, under the surface of breath, folded into the way your spine adjusts when sitting. A little slower. A little less confident. The system is held, but something in you has registered instability. Not fear. Not yet. Just friction. Enough to sharpen awareness, not enough to shake routine. Yet even that small friction is dangerous. In a world where sameness is survival, friction is flame. You feel it behind the eyes. Like pressure swelling too slowly to notice at first. The way a microfracture spreads without sound. The others don't see it. Or maybe they do, but say nothing. Just like you would. There are no interventions here. No one pulls you aside to ask if you're okay. Because okay doesn't exist as a category anymore. There is only present, only functioning. If you're moving, working, showing up for rotation, then you're fine. That's the measure. That's the currency of health in this place. And by that metric, you are whole, but something stirs anyway. You find yourself checking the door panels twice, listening longer to the system cycle up, watching your own hand as it types the log, detached, curious, like it belongs to someone else. And there are seconds, just seconds, when you hesitate. stare into the reflection of the screen, not at data, at shape, outline, silhouette, trying to remember what that figure was before all this, before the rhythms, before the silence. That's when the sound returns, not the deviation, something else, something internal, the sound of a thought forming before language, heavier than a question, older than reason, the shape of choice. You had forgotten that shape, forgotten it could even form. The system was supposed to erase it. Routine was supposed to flatten it. But here it is, slow, forming beneath the surface like a reef beneath calm water, the outline of a possibility. Leave. Not literally. Not an escape. There's no exit. Just break. Interrupt. Interrupt the cycle. Change something. Anything. But even that thought, however quiet, however vague, is sacrilege, so you breathe. Return to pattern. Press the green button again, even though the system doesn't need it, just to prove the loop still holds. Just to hear the hum respond, just to feel that you haven't drifted too far. Not yet. The uniform feels heavier than it should. Fabric hasn't changed, nor the fit. Yet something in its presence rests wrong on the skin, as though the fabric remembers something the wearer does not. Hands move with care now, less from fatigue, more from hesitation buried deep inside muscle memory. Each interaction with the console becomes a measured ceremony. Even blinking slows, perception narrows, input becomes hesitation wrapped in procedure. Instructions scroll across the terminal, familiar commands, sequences memorized long ago. Recognition occurs, but engagement delays. Eyes drift across the screen, but part of the mind watches from elsewhere, detached, calculating whether the body will continue performing without full presence. Somehow, it does. Thoughts intrude. Uninvited, shapeless. A childhood hallway. A dog barking in the distance. Taste of orange juice, too cold, unexpected. Irrelevant but persistent. They arrive without prompt, scenes unrequested. Vivid in texture but impossible to place. Associations fail. Logic rejects them, yet they linger, coiling through the background of awareness like vapor in a sealed chamber. Routines remain uninterrupted, diagnostics complete, logs updated, reports filed. Yet a phantom delay stretches between action and comprehension. No one comments. Observers would find nothing wrong. Movements align with expectation, function continues. Still, something behind the eyes speaks a different language now. A dream returns. Perhaps it never left. Memory struggles to recall the details, but the feeling remains. Weightlessness without peace. A hallway with no walls. A staircase downward with no end. Each step echoes louder than the one before. Waking offers no clarity, only a sense of displacement that clings to the ribs. Another shift begins. Same path walked 100 times. Familiar corridor, same lights, same air. But the temperature seems unfamiliar. Not colder, not warmer, different. Artificiality no longer comforts. The hum overhead loses rhythm. Imperceptible to others. To the system, everything functions. To the man beneath the surface, dissonance grows. One crewmate offers a glance. Brief, unreadable. Not suspicion. Something else. Recognition. Unspoken acknowledgement of strain beneath control. Nothing is said. The code of silence holds. But for a moment, it becomes clear. Isolation isn't always singular. Others drift too, each within their own system of containment. The question arises once more. Quiet, unresolved. Who was I before this rhythm replaced memory? No answer follows. Only the steady flow of artificial oxygen, recycled too many times to resemble breath. The mission remains. No end date, no surface in sight, but something inside no longer seeks escape, only understanding. Not of systems, but of self beneath them. The corridor stretches ahead, unbroken, featureless, stripped of novelty. Each panel on the wall identical to the last, every light fixed at the same dull glow. Eyes scan the surfaces out of habit, not expectation. No anomalies appear, yet the act of looking remains. Not vigilance, compulsion. The need to confirm that the world remains the same, even as the interior shifts. Breath feels thinner, though oxygen levels read constant. Inhalation takes effort now, not physical exertion, but permission, as if the air no longer welcomes lungs that hesitate. Motion persists, one foot in front of the other. Measured steps echo softly, too rhythmic to comfort, too hollow to ignore. Nothing obstructs progress. Yet every meter walked feels longer than the last. At the next station, gloved fingers hover over controls. A procedure memorized, executed hundreds of times before. Muscles begin the sequence, but the mind stalls. The meaning behind the action, why this button, why this order, fades. Execution without understanding. Completion without clarity. The task resolves itself, but the echo remains. A split second of disconnection. Subtle, dangerous. The body responds by increasing precision. Overcompensation masks fracture. Eyes check displays twice. Fingers pause between keystrokes. Every motion exaggerated in slowness as if dragging focus back into the present. The screen confirms all readings normal. Yet something trembles just below perception, like a current beneath still water. Rest comes, or something shaped like it. The rack encloses the body, metal above, below, beside. Familiar tightness, predictable sounds. But the mind refuses to dissolve. Thought stretches, reaches, uncoils like a wire long compressed. It finds nothing to attach to. No memories vivid enough to ground. No feelings strong enough to anchor. Instead, it floats. Drifts through static. No dreams form. Only sensations. Cold tile under bare feet. Warm breath on the back of the neck. An open door where there shouldn't be one. None of it coherent. All of it real. Eyes open in the dark. No noise, no motion. Yet the heart beats faster. No reason. Just rhythm disrupted. Time resumes. Shift begins. The body moves again. Repeats the route. Systems unchanged. But now there's a tremor. Unseen, internal. Multiplying beneath every step. The thought comes again. Unwelcome. Unfinished. What happens when the rhythm fails? What remains when function ends? No voice answers. Only the low hum. Only pressure. Only the sense that something once tightly held is now slipping loose. There's a shift in perception, not visual, not tactile, but perceptual. Like walking through a reflection rather than a hallway. Every object familiar yet reversed, slightly out of phase. Tasks complete themselves. Fingers type commands before thoughts catch up. Checklists blur. Not due to negligence. Repetition strips them of distinction. One sequence bleeds into the next, operations merging into a long, unbroken movement with no origin point. Inside, something watches. Not a second presence. Just a partitioned fragment detached from the rest. It observes the body function, the hands working, the lips mouthing responses during drills. That fragment doesn't intervene. It's not there to help. It records. A witness to decline, impartial, unblinking, suspended within the quiet layers of consciousness. Elsewhere in the vessel, the lights dim slightly. An automatic adjustment. Load balancing. No cause for concern, yet it feels ominous. Shadows stretch longer across the bulkheads. A corridor seems deeper than before, darker toward the far end. Logic insists nothing has changed. Instruments agree, but eyes lie. Or perhaps the mind behind them no longer trusts its own filters. The bunk no longer offers rest. It closes around the body like a drawer. Each breath echoes. The mattress feels thinner, though it's the same. Dreams avoid the mind now. Instead, gaps fill with looping phrases. Half-remembered sentences. Repeated names, not personal ones. Generic labels from systems and rosters cycled over and over. Meaningless, but constant. Isolation isn't absence. It's excess. Excess of sameness. Excess of stillness. Thought has nowhere to land, so it circles. Tight loops that spiral inward, compressing, heating. pressure of the self against the boundaries of silence. No room left to stretch. In that compression, self-definition weakens. Not dramatically, just eroded, like symbols rubbed off keys from use. You remember your name, but only when required. You recall your past only in shadow. People fade first. Places remain longer, especially sounds. Wind in tall grass, a refrigerator hum in a childhood kitchen, a dog barking in the distance, all without context, all stronger than any recent conversation. No one speaks of this, not directly, but you see it. Others pause longer at monitors. Movement slow, not from fatigue. There's too much automation for real strain, but from internal distraction. You meet someone's gaze across a corridor. They look away too fast, not shame, recognition. The silent question, are you still whole? The answer, unspoken, drifts between you. Whole enough, for now. Eventually the stillness wins. Not in triumph, not in conquest. It doesn't announce itself. It simply stops needing to. You don't remember the last time you checked the clock. Somewhere along the rotations, the meaning dissolved. The days no longer form shapes, only edges, only shadows. The ship hums. Always has, always will. But now, that hum isn't a sound anymore. It's a pulse, a companion, a final voice beneath all the others. You finish your last task with the same care you gave the first. Wipe down the terminal. Sign the log. Step back. The air feels heavier, but the lungs no longer fight it. It belongs to you now, or you to it. There's no need to resolve that. Lights shift, not because of failure, routine, night mode, the color of memory. Everything softens. In your bunk, the curtain drawn, silence complete, the space closes gently around you. It doesn't press, it holds. The mattress accepts your weight, the air moves slowly across your face, systems breathe beside you, the rhythm is perfect. Thoughts fade without resistance, not because they're chased away, because they've said all they needed. There's nothing more to observe. The witness has done his duty. You feel the last tension leave the spine, hands relax. No alarms, no calls, no unfinished report. There's no conclusion here, only completion. You became part of the system, and the system endures. No goodbye is needed. You are still. You are function. You are peace. Sleep. Good night.